So, good afternoon and welcome to this extraordinary meeting of the EMA Patient and Consumer Working Party. So today we celebrate the 10th anniversary in very good company with former members and former co-chair of the Patient and Consumer Working Party. We have a photographer in the room, so don't be surprised if you see him around. And he's here because we want to keep memories of this day. And the meeting is broadcast live, and I would like to welcome very warmly all the participants who will follow us online today. So when we started 10 years ago, we had very concrete objectives with very clear timelines for the deliverables, which were to implement some recommendations. But beyond that, we had absolutely no idea of how this interaction between regulators and patient and consumer would develop and whether the whole thing was sustainable. And 10 years later, looking at the annual report 2015, which will be presented to the management board in 2 days and then published on the EMA website very shortly after, you can see that it's a quite thick document with a lot of information about the involvement of patient, consumer, and healthcare professional. And you notice, looking at this report, that now patients provide input at all levels of the agency and in all domains, whether it's scientific, policy, or planning. And reflecting on this, you just realize that the PCWP, which is the acronym for Patient and Consumer Working Party, this PCWP has triggered most of the initiatives which are now being implemented. And it has also contributed to help the agency to mature the reflection on how to involve patient and further reaching civil society, and also to monitor the implementation and make sure that we are on the right track. So I can say that the Working Party is now key in the agency life. And today we will have the opportunity to look back at what we have achieved, but also look towards the future to see what it looks like and what are the challenges ahead of us. And so I wish you a very nice afternoon and a great celebration. And now I would like to hand over to Guido Razi, the Executive Director.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you. I just want to join Isabel in welcoming you and to share with you how much we expect and we need to have from your contribution. You say that it's an extraordinary meeting. I think the contribution we expect from patient is extraordinary, because the complementary vision in terms of benefit and the risk perception is unique. The part of the patient cannot be achieved by anybody else but the patient. As much as the quality of life and the trade-off between quality and risk is a concept that is very well known but not yet captured at the extent that it should be. I had an interesting conversation in these days with organizations from US where they are trying to personalize the therapy, but not in the way we are used with the genetic approach or genomic approach, but in terms that the same condition may require different therapy according to the expectation of the patient. This means for the patient to reach an awareness of the option, the therapeutical option, of the evolution of the disease, of the implication in terms of quality of life, that is even higher of what generally is required and expected from patients. That's why I think 10 years are a good experience, but we need forever to keep going and to enhance even further and to explore new way to address and to drive and to steer the development of medicine and how to use them, which is even more important than just having them. I will not take more of your time. I know that you have a busy agenda. I regret I cannot stay all the time as I had planned initially, but I won't miss to join you for a toast, and I won't miss to try to come for the conclusions. And then I know that, as usual, I will be briefed perfectly by EMA people. Thank you very much for coming here today with us.
Thank you, Guido. And we will start this afternoon with a panel discussion on converging pathways, how patient, consumer, and EMA work together. And I hand over to my colleague, Juan Garcia Burgos, who is Head of Medical and Health Information.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Isabel, for the introduction. And I think many of you know me, and you know I have been in the past quite involved in the development of the interaction with patients and consumers within the agency. Therefore, I think you can imagine that I feel very honored to moderate this session and to have discussion with representatives of patients, of consumers, and also of the person who has been leading the interaction at the agency. When Isabel first approached me and proposed to set up this session, focusing very much on how patients and consumers has initiated the whole interaction, I felt, of course, very enthusiastic. And one of the main issues that came into the consideration, into the discussion, is in a way the consideration we pay to patients and consumers. And it is true that they are two different groups which approach medicines not always in the same manner, but I think for the agency it was very clear from the very beginning that we wanted to sit them together in the same table and to have a very open and honest discussion with both of them. And this is the way we started it all, and it's the way that we have used to develop the interaction over the years. This has brought occasionally some challenges, but over time it's clear that this has been one of the key elements for success. And I think we can maybe proudly say today that we wouldn't have achieved what we have achieved if we wouldn't have put them both together, complementing each other. So to represent patients and consumers and EMA, this session has brought François Houillet. François is representing patients, and of course you know François. He's working at the European Organization for Rare Diseases, EURORDIS. He's Director of Treatment Information and Access. And since I know François, he has been advocating for patients, but he has been advocating for patients much before I met him. And it goes back to the early 90s when he was still studying medicine. So he started advocating for HIV, then he moved to EURORDIS advocating more on rare diseases. But also what is really relevant is that he was in the first delegation. He was part of the first delegation who came to enable this first discussion at the agency. So we're very pleased to have François with us. Representing the consumers, we have Ilaria, Ilaria Pasarani. She joined the European Consumers Organization in 2006, and she's the head of the Food and Health Department. And in this function, she informs and keeps the members of BEUC fully informed about all developments and information regarding health, regarding medicines, and regarding food. And she has represented BEUC in different fora, the European Commission, at the Parliament, EU Health Policy Forum. And she is graduated in economics and management at the Bocconi University in Milano. And she's also honorary scientific researcher in the School for Public Health and Primary Care at the Faculty of Health, Medicine and Life Science at the Maastricht University. And I think we also have to congratulate her because she has been appointed member of the management board of the agency, representing civil society. So welcome, Ilaria. And the last participant is Isabel. And I think, again, most of you know Isabel. Isabel is currently the head of Patients and Healthcare Professionals Department at the agency since December 2013. But she is a medical doctor from the University of Grenoble in France. She specialized in endocrinology and metabolic diseases. And she started working as an endocrinologist, but soon she moved to the French Ministry of Health and afterwards to pharmaceutical industry, where she worked before joining the agency in 1995 when the agency was established. Initially, Isabel took responsibility to establish the scientific advice service at the agency, but afterwards she was appointed head of sector of safety and efficacy of medicines. But in 2004, when the new legislation came into force and there was a need to have more emphasis on patient engagement, she took these responsibilities and she started to build in a more official way this interaction we had already started before. So I think it's clear, and you will agree with me, that I think we cannot have a better representation of the three elements that has been shaping civil society engagement. And I think what is important is that they are at the core of this interaction that we have developed, but they were also involved at the very beginning. So they bring a very unique point of view. And you will agree with me that is the three together are the maximum expression of public engagement in medicines regulation in Europe, but even beyond. Because I think we are very proud to consider that the European model is very much one that everyone is looking and is referring to. So we are going to start this session, and we don't want to have presentations. We wanted to have more a discussion. Basically, what we are going to do is to ask different questions to some of them. We have some discussions, but we haven't shared with them the questions. The intention is to have a very honest and unprepared answers. We don't expect much surprise, but hopefully to be able. And we will also would like to open and to have some intervention from the audience afterwards. So. I think the first question that we identify is that, and this is for Isabel, when did the EMA identify the need to work with patients and consumers?
Well, the short answer would be in 1995. And I'm saying that for two reasons. First of all, because that was one of the first declaration from the chair of the management board when I think it was in 1995 or 1996. When he said that the agency cannot work without involving the stakeholders, stakeholder being, of course, industry, because we have to work with industry, but also patient, consumer, healthcare professional, and academia. And so since the very beginning, we had that in mind. And I think Buck was represented very early on in this multi-stakeholder meeting that we had at the agency, and we called that the debriefing after the CHMP, the committee. It was a CPMP at that time, and Buck was represented. So that was one path, but we had another maybe a bit more lively and chaotic path, because in 1995, one of the first medicine which was approved and evaluated at the agency was an HIV drug. And of course, the HIV patient knocked at the door of the agency to discuss with us endpoints and a lot of things, very scientific issues. And that's where we realized, together with the committees, that in fact patient had an added value, and we could have extremely serious discussion with them, and they would bring something in addition to the expertise, the scientific expertise we were used to. And from there, in fact, things have been moving on, and in 2002 we organized a big workshop with patient and consumer organization, And the outcome of this workshop was that we should sit together and reflect on 4 areas, which were transparency, patient information, the interaction with the committees, between patient organization and the committees, and pharmacovigilance. And from there, it has never stopped. We prepared this recommendation, and in order to implement this recommendation, then we had to set up the working party. And then we are here.
I think it's very reassuring to see that we didn't have to wait for the legislation. We had the need already before. If we go now to see how patients and consumers, how were you approached, or how did you approach or were approached? Because I think it may change depending on your point of view. Let's go first with Francois. How did you approach or were approached the EMA to work together?
I will start, in fact, answering to the first question. I think the EMA has always needed to work with us. They just didn't know, or at least they didn't all know. And I think the EMA is really a network. And in the EMA at the very first days, there were different experts, different members from different national agencies with different experiences working with us already in the past. And I think there were key actors, particularly from the agencies who had been working with patients at the national level. Arriving to this agency when it was created, they naturally had that question: what is the format of interaction with patients here, and how can we organize this? And in fact, the first time I was approached, I even was informed about the creation of the EMA was in 1994, just after the new regulation that created the agency had been adopted, where the Jean-Michel Alexandre was the head of evaluation at the French agency, and who had been key in organizing meetings with all his staff during the days of HIV and AIDS, which I was advocating for at that time, invited us to feel involved and to engage dialogue with the EMA based on the successes we had in the national discussions we had at the French level and in other parts of the EU. So I think these first steps of approaching and having worked together, having engaged in trust and good working relations in the past was really key when we realized that we had to go and work with the EMA.
And your point of view, Ilaria, your experience?
Well, I was not there, but as Isabel said, BERC was involved in the discussions about stakeholder involvement with the agency at the very beginning. And I think this was linked to the fact that BERC has a long tradition of representing the views and the interests of people, because it has been established in 1962. So I think at the European level, in the Brussels scene, at that time, we were maybe one of the very few organizations who could be considered a partner in the discussion, and that's why maybe the European Medicine Agency approached BERC. From our side and from our member side, that there is a strong interest, and there has always been a strong interest in the work of the agency because of the concrete impact that decisions taken here in Canary Wharf have on people's daily life. So we see this as a fruitful collaboration, and we look forward to continue this collaboration with you all.
And once that you started to get based on the expectations you had and the expectation you came, do you think that the expectations were met, Ilaria?
Well, I think at the beginning it was for both sides a learning exercise to understand each other, to understand what the organizations were doing respectively. And this learning exercise evolved into a more peer partnership. And if at the beginning we could say that this involvement was more linked to what scholars of the EU policy-making process define as output legitimacy, being, giving the more legitimacy to the work of the agency, I think over the years, through this learning curve, it became an input legitimacy, meaning that patients' organizations, consumers' organizations actively contribute to the work of the agency and improve really the the outcome of the decision taken here. So from learning to working together, I think this path has been very constructive. It was a long exercise, but we are there. And as Isabel said, the report of the 2015 PCWP clearly show the added value of this collaboration and the concrete input that patients and consumer organizations can provide to the agency.
Well, expectations for these interactions. In fact, I had two first times. I had the first time and the second first time. The second first time was when, in fact, after these initial phases where the agency started to work with patients, and then it took time before more developments could happen. But a key element which I think is important to remind is when the European legislator was thinking of favorable environment to develop medicines for rare diseases, where some felt the need for a support of this legislative work, and a European organization was created to express the voice of patients in this legislative process. The patients who came and who supported the initiative proposed that they would be part of the decision making, particularly for the scientific evaluation of the severity of the rare diseases on which orphan drugs are designated in an era where we all know it's really difficult to find experts. And the European legislator agreed to that, and that is why the Committee for Orphan Medicinal Products, from its very creation, has patients as members. And it was, I think, an experiment for everyone, for the EMA, for the patients, for the legislator. And from our side, I think we immediately understood that that was the right thing to do. Our expectations were even made beyond our expectations because it really structured the rare disease community with a new role to play in actually helping the development of new medicines for the many diseases there are. And the European Organization for Rare Diseases nowadays is still and more structured around this environment for orphan medicinal products.
May I just add, because I think maybe for the case of Eurordis is very clear the way you say it, but I'm not sure for consumers, because in a way you come here representing your organization and representing the community of patients in your disease or consumers in general. But you need maybe, I guess, to report back to your organization on the activities because you are the gate for this interaction. Have you ever had to convince of the added value of this interaction, or it was these expectations, meeting this expectation was as clear for your organization as for yourself? Have you ever have a challenge by the organization maybe that you need to really demonstrate the added value, or it has been very obvious and very clear? And also, do you have experience going beyond your organizations, which is the experience from other groups?
No, I never found myself in the situation of having to convince one of our members about the importance of the work that we can do with you. They like very much, for example, the revision of the package leaflet to make sure that with the friendly disease that is something very concrete that they do and we can do for people out there. What is difficult is communicating about the EU in general, because you have to translate the language. We were used to speak the EU lingo in a way, so you have to translate that, and that is a difficult thing. And it's also difficult to explain the link between the EU level and the national level. So our members, for example, have difficulty in understanding that decisions taken at the CHMP reflect the views of the experts from the National Medicines Agency. So they don't see this link. They see the National Medicine Agency and the EU Medicine Agency, but they don't. They would like to know more about the interaction and how one is linked to the other. So that is the most difficult part.
Well, I never really had to convince any patient advocate or any patient on the importance of the scientific discussions held at the EMA. Maybe it's the opposite. It's maybe sometimes had to calm down their expectations or their willingness to participate and to ask them to think twice. For example, I still have permanent discussions with other advocates regarding should patients be members of the CHMP with full voting rights. I have a personal opinion, which is not necessarily the same than other patient advocates, and we have to make sure there is a good discussion to really understand what would be the best contribution patients could have in this committee, but there are still many other roles and activities for which discussions are in permanent progress.
And from the side of EMA, could you?
So from the side of EMA, maybe I would answer the second question before the first one, whether the expectations were met, and I would say no. I think we went far beyond anything we could have imagined when we started. And because just to remind you that 20 years ago, the regulators were working in total secrecy. There was no transparency at all. And where we are now is, can we be more transparent than we are? Probably yes, a little bit more. But at the moment, we have reached a level of transparency which is quite remarkable. What did we expect initially? Initially, I believe we did expect to increase transparency about the work we were doing, about maybe how Europe was working with this new agency and all the competent authorities at national level, because that was not so straightforward, and we thought it was also necessary to explain to the public and to the patient how we were working together. And maybe also to reinforce the trust of the public. It's always a big issue with public institutions to get the trust of the public. And I think these were the two main aspects that we looked at the beginning. And of course, with the example of the HIV patient and then with the patient with a rare disease in the camp, we did realize that there was another level where we could expect a lot, and that was a direct interaction into the evaluation of medicine, because there could really make the difference between a good development and a not so good development, to make the difference in putting on the market something which is really meaningful for the patients. So I think that's more or less what we were thinking at that time.
I'd like to mention, though, that there are domains where our expectations have not been met yet. If I remember the meetings we had with the CPMP, now CHMP in 98, 99, the main topic for discussion was to present at that time the different times when European patients with HIV were accessing medicines on a compassionate basis, with huge differences between member states. And this is still a topic for which Europe failed to harmonize their schemes. And this is maybe something frequent in Europe, where the European system is half European and half national, with the EMA having some role to play in organizing compassionate use programs, but most of the roles are for the member states. And this is typically a subject for which the initial discussions that were held in 98 could be held exactly the same way nowadays. We haven't done much progress in trying to make these programs more timely for many patients in many member states.
So moving, because not everything has been very always steady. We have had maybe some challenges and some positive experience. So maybe just your flavor or your first impression, Ilaria, for you, which maybe is the most positive aspect, and then the most challenging one on these years.
Well, it's always hard for me to say that I speak on behalf of patients and consumers because no one elected me. So I can say that I represent the interest of consumers. It's always challenging to think that what we say here has then an influence on the work you do, and again, this translates into something very concrete on people's daily life. So that is the most beautiful and also scaring things at the same time. We had many positive and challenging discussions here at the Patient and Consumer Working Party. I remember a very intense discussion on the legislative proposal on information to patients. But I also recall that we had a very unanimous decision about the logo to identify medicine under intensive monitoring. And I recall that the Pharmacovigilance Committee was very happy that we managed to reach an agreement also with healthcare professionals in such an easy way, and which made their life easy as well. I had many positive memories about discussions also during the coffee breaks about patients versus consumers, who is who, and they were all very enriching. So overall, it has been for me a very positive experience, personally and professionally.
And the challenge?
The challenge is always to reconcile the different perspectives between patients and consumer organizations, because patients' organizations, especially those represented here, represent mostly patients with chronic conditions, patients with life-threatening conditions who are very knowledgeable and expert in their disease, while our perspective is more of the general public, so a more public health perspective. Also the perspective of those who use a medicine once in their life, people who get vaccines, parents who have to decide whether to vaccinate their children or not. And I think these different perspectives are complementary between each other, so that is very good. But sometimes it's difficult to put yourself in the shoes of someone with a chronic condition. And at the same time, it's difficult for someone who has a life-threatening condition to think that defining the benefit-risk ratio for a medicine that is used widely by many people who don't have a chronic disease is also challenging. So putting yourself in the shoes of someone else is also the biggest challenge.
So you mentioned as a challenge, but in a way, you don't highlight as a negative thing, no? You cannot conclude this leads to a very downfall of the
No, it's very difficult, and that's why it's good to have both, because you need both perspectives, because the medicine you regulate are for the general population, so you need to take into account both. It's just very difficult for me as an individual to, as I said, to put myself in the feet of someone with a chronic condition who is confronted with a serious problem every day, instead of with someone who take a medicine for, I don't know, headache or an allergy.
And for you, Francois, which should be the positives and the negatives?
Thinking again to the Denver principles of patient advocacy, which say, among other, we should participate in all decisions that affect our lives on an equal basis. And by equal basis, it doesn't mean that, of course, we pretend to have all the scientific and technical knowledge that everybody has, but at least to participate in discussions where no one will say, I'm a doctor, I'm the one who knows, and you're the patient, you're the one who ignores, but really on an equal basis, engaging in mutual respect, credibility, and listening. And I think at the EMA, this has been achieved. I think it's clear from all, maybe not all, but almost all patients who participate in discussions here, that's really the case. The challenge, of course, is the time for me, my opinion, giving the timelines of all the regulatory procedures, the time needed for patients to be involved, to be engaged, to understand all the issues, to fully contribute. And I think most patients would feel some degree of frustration after going home and thinking, oh, I should have said that. Oh, now I only understand now that this was really an important issue, but I couldn't think of it during the meeting. So one challenge, I think, will be to find and to search, to explore different modalities, other modalities for patients to really contribute and to avoid this frustration that maybe sometimes some are expressing.
And talking from the point of view of the patients, and following up on what Ilaria said, did you consider the fact that the whole interaction was built with patients? I assume this, of course, I know that you feel it's a positive one, but would you consider it's a challenge or is a facilitator element on the other hand?
The response is so obvious to me that I thought I didn't understand the question. Your question is if we wouldn't have been here to develop the framework. Well, I think, of course, maybe it should be evaluated by external experts or evaluators, but I think, yes, sometimes we are surprised by the very good ideas that we didn't even have thought about, but EMA came forward with them. But we hope that, yes, that was a collective construct of a framework with adaptations. As a French person, I would say not a revolution, but a constant and permanent evolution of the framework. Testing pilots and exploring new ways to move ahead.
I'm just thinking about, because I think you have a unique experience, you have been here for so long. If you would like to give some kind of advice of other organizations who would like to engage and maybe to have them prepare, what would be the advice that you would give to them, Ilaria?
Well, you need to find within your organization committed people who believe in this exercise, but those who are willing to dedicate their time to this, because you need time to prepare, you need time to come to the meeting, you need time to debrief and follow up and to share what you learn with other colleagues. So individual and personal commitment, I think it's very important, and I would identify that as the first advice. And then the second advice would be not to be scared during the first meetings from all the acronyms and the difficult words, because then you learn with the time. But for the first meeting, it can be, a bit too much. But then with time, you catch up.
Maybe I would say to engage by asking to discuss about the most difficult problems that you have and get rid of the daily business. For example, this morning, a member from the CHMP approached with an issue which really they have and we have. We share the same issue. What to do with the patients who started to benefit from a product which finally is not authorized, or started to benefit from a product in a compassionate use program and finally the product is not authorized. That is one of the most difficult issues. I think if we manage to engage dialogue on these issues and solve them, this is a demonstration of the added value of working with us. So engage with the most difficult things and not necessarily with the most obvious and easy ones, but don't be afraid of contacting the regulators or other bodies with the most difficult aspects of drug regulatory.
And from your side, Isabel, what kind of advice would you give, or you give in a way, in practice, to everyone who approached for the first time?
So I would say just send us an email and maybe putting my administrative hat on, I would say it would be better if you fulfill the criteria we have put in place together with the PCWP, which are criteria about the European extent of the organization, which are about transparency on the funding, transparency on the activities. Of course, you need to have a specific interest in medicines, because that's what we are dealing with at the agency. And as François said, you have a question, just ask, send an email, ask your question, and we will answer. I think we have always answered to all requests we have received, whether it's positive or negative. You never know what the outcome will be, but just do it. That's as simple as that.
Thank you very much. So I think it has been quite inspirational to listen to you three. We are coming to an end, and I think we would like to finish with one just question, and we can follow Ilaria, François, and finish with Isabel. And I think, let's imagine in an ideal world where resources is not a problem, there's no constraints of time. What would you it's a wish. How would you like to see the future of the PCWP in the next 10 years, Ilaria?
Well, I would like to see the PCWP still relevant for the work of the agency, but also a PCWP that continues to reach out to organizations who are not represented there, and to continue maintaining this wide perspective on the interests of all users of medicines. So as I said before, chronically ill patients, but also parents who have to decide for their children still. So the general population, to keep the general public perspective.
Same, and add a role for the PCWP to help at the national level, patient and consumers organizations to be involved on a much broader basis with their national authorities, and to add research. I think there are already a few examples where members of the PCWP and EMA have engaged into common research, such as the patient preferences elicitations, part of the PROTECT project, or more recently with the pharmacovigilance unit to explore which data there is in new drug vigilance and see if we can draw lessons from there. I think this kind of research, joint research, or collaborative research, is promising. We can certainly think of other projects to test different modalities for involvement of patients, and if more research projects could emerge from the work plan of the PCWP, maybe that could be interesting.
And finally, Isabel, which is your wish for the next 10 years?
Well, I'm very much in line with Ilaria and François, but maybe two dreams. One would be to have maybe to reach out at national level, to have more interaction with the competent authorities and with patients in the member state, especially because now we start to look at the development of product also together with the health technology assessment bodies. And there we have, of course, EMA and the health technology assessment bodies of the different member states and patients who are involved. And I think it would be good to reach out to the national competent authorities and to patients at national level in order to make sure that we understand each other and we are working on the same lines. And then for the PCWP itself, I think that there is a certain level of frustration because we have only 20 members, 20 organizations represented in the working party, and it would be good to have more. And how could we reconcile the fact that we don't have to have a too big meeting, because it's also the success of the working parties because it's a small group, so we can work and we can move on quite fast. And if we are too many, I'm afraid we would lose this momentum. But at the same time, as Ilaria was saying, it may be very frustrating for the other organization who would like to be part of the work of the PCWP. So that's something I think we will need to reflect in the working party in the next year on how we could do that.
So thank you very much. Just to wrap up a little bit, to have a bit of a summary of what we have heard. I think what I heard, what I like it very much, is that it's clear that despite what the objectives that we have set up at the beginning when we are starting working with patients and healthcare and consumers, we have gone beyond expectations, and everyone agrees. We have exceeded expectations considering what we ask. Patients are here to stay. It's not anymore a nice to have. I think it's a clear requirement to ensure that we can have a proper outcome of the scientific evaluation and regulations. On the other hand, I think it's clear that there is still a lot to do. And I think we have heard a lot of suggestions, but in terms of evaluation, even we heard about topic groups, about more work in children, older populations. But what also is clear is that in order to continue to be successful, we need to work together, patients and consumers. This is a recipe for success, having them together, and even if it's different, they contribute to each other. The key for success has been mentioned, that it has been a real involvement with clear results. It was not just discussions, but there was a clear outcome, sometimes difficult, sometimes took time to come, but there was really something we can measure as an outcome. And that's very important. Looking at the future, what we want to continue seeing is a group which is meaningful and relevant and continue to have this measurable outcome, and that reaches more the public, and also especially is able to reach more at national level, where we can have more impact on patients at this level. And also what was mentioned is that maybe how we can extend the involvement and involve more organizations, but at the same time avoid overloading the current system we have, which we acknowledge is working very well. So I think has been very, very useful, a very nice reflection. I would like very much to thank Isabel, Ilaria, and Francois. Ilaria would like to say something, so we...
Thank you very much. Just one last word. We spoke about factors of success, and I mentioned before that it's important to find within the organization patient and consumer committed staff member, but you also need committed staff in the organization that is involving stakeholders. And I would like to take this opportunity, and I think I'm speaking on behalf of everybody here, to thank Isabelle Mulon in particular for her strong leadership and balanced approach throughout these years, and all her staff for the great work you have been doing and for making this work and for making it so easy for us to contribute. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ilaria. It's very much a teamwork, not only at the EMA, but also with the group. I think we are all at the origin of the success. And now I would like to call the three co-chairs of the PCWP to ask them to talk about their respective mandates. And I would like to welcome Nikos Dedes from the EATG, Liz Murphy from Eurordis, and David Harry from the EATG. And so we are going to look at your perspective as co-chairs on what has been done during these three mandates. And we started this morning with the fourth mandate of the Working Party. We have not yet elected the fourth chair. We will elect him or her at our next meeting in September, but we have all the previous one, and we will listen to them in the right order. So the first chair of the Working Party was Nikos Dedes. So Nikos, are you ready? Yes. Please.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It is with a great sense of pride and equal measure of nostalgia that I speak before you to pay tribute to the early days of the Patients and Consumers Working Party. It is the 10th year anniversary for the PCWP, and last year was the 20th year anniversary for the European Medicines Agency. As Isabel said in her answer, the European AIDS Treatment Group was at the doorsteps of the European Medicines Agency when it opened in 1995. That is, we felt, and Francois mentioned that he knew about it even before the rest of us from France. And we have been told stories of how the CHMP approved some of the first HIV medicines that came for approval with difference of 1 or 2 votes in favor, and many of the members of the CHMP abstaining. And that was only because patient representatives gave testimony. So it was a period when things were being changed, and the contribution of the patients was critical. The other preeminent patient group to engage with the European Medicines Agency was mentioned again. It was Eurordis, and indeed the work that Jan Lecam did. They secured in the creation of the new scientific committee for orphan drugs to have a patient representative. That already created an experience in the agency of how useful this interaction was, and indeed it led then to the number of workshops that Isabel mentioned with patient organizations in May of 2002, and then there was this creation of the Patients and Consumers Working Group. It was not yet a recognized party of CHMP. And that was in May 2003. A critical meeting took place in early December 2004, which led to changes being introduced in the roadmap that was about to be approved from the European Medicines Agency. And indeed, the feedback that Noel and Isabel took from this group was transferred to the management board, which approved the roadmap in December of that year. And then, of course, during this period, as Isabel said, we identified the 4 main topics that we wanted to interact with the agency. And that was transparency, information on medicines, pharmacovigilance, and the interaction with all scientific committees. The other thing that we worked on was to come up with criteria that patient and consumer groups needed to fulfill in order to be eligible to interact with the agency. And then, of course, this number of organizations was much larger than what the PCWP was. In September 2005, the management board supported all these suggestions, and it named that interaction with stakeholders was an integral part of the agency's mission and one of its core activities. So there we come to the creation of the Patients and Consumers Working Party officially in December 2006, and the first term started immediately after in 2007. 10 organizations were at that time approved, and also representatives from all scientific committees. I think, as many people have said today, it is important to pay tribute also to the co-chair with Isabel, Frits Lekkerkerker, who was a representative of the Dutch agency at the CHMP. He was a very strong supporter of this interaction, helped us very much in the first year. And then, of course, he was not alone. So for the transparency topic, what I would say were identified in this early time was to make sure that society understood the role of the regulators and the interaction with stakeholders. We wanted to achieve that. The other thing that we asked and happened later was to have access to what is called now EudraCT, access to clinical trial information. The other thing that David mentioned earlier today, and for which I'm proud for, was the code of practice that was created when Jean-Georges asked about it back then, and it was finalized in June 2009. The other thing that the Patients and Consumers Working Party contributed was the agency transparency policy and conflict of interest, where again we gave a lot of feedback. The other thing that we asked and was offered was training for other patient organizations to make sure that they understood the kind of work that we did. Perhaps here it's worth mentioning that at the end of my term, I advocated for the expansion of the Patients and Consumers Working Party to include more representatives from the public health sector, with the inclusion of Health Action International, so that we bridge the gap that Ilaria mentioned sometimes existed between consumer and patient groups. On the information to medicine, the first thing that we did very fast was the review of the package leaflets. That was an amazing exercise for all of us. The other thing was that we said that the European, the EPAR report was not comprehensible, and we discussed and we created together the EPAR summaries. Many people even today prefer to read the EPAR summaries rather than the package leaflet in order to get information on the drugs. The other thing that we asked and was created was the newsletter, the bulletin, which now has grown and is used by everybody. Another thing that I'm particularly proud for the information on medicines was a joint statement of all organizations, excluding Health Action International, which was signed in September 2007. That was one of those contentious topics, and it was also an exercise for us to identify the common ground, and it is something that I hope that we'll continue to do. And of course, there was the request to create a database of all medicines in Europe, which has been eventually created. And also, we were involved in the European Medicines Agency safety communication. I'm sure the older members will remember when they would come and ask us about the wording and things like that. In the pharmacovigilance, of course, we were always asked, as I said, for changes in the package leaflet when there were new indications. And Priya mentioned about the pilot project, which started in those years where 2 representatives went there for 3 months. I really wonder how Albert has been doing it this all the years. It's an amazing work. And then, of course, the other thing that happened during those years was an initiative in various countries on patient-reported side effects, which has proven to be a very useful instrument. Finally, with the interactions of the scientific committees, we discussed and identified the different role of patient experts versus the patient representatives. The patient representatives can bring the opinion of an organization, but then they have to leave when the discussion takes place. But the patient experts are dealt in the same way like all European medicines experts. The other thing that we achieved was the participation in the scientific advisory groups. We were asked to provide views in writing for products which were under evaluation. Of course, the target is to be there through a process. The participation in the scientific advice working party. And finally, there was the working group which was created for the third country clinical trials, and various other ad hoc things that happened after my tenure. My one and only complaint for those years was what seemed to me a glacial speed with which change was taking place. And of course, perhaps this is the fact that I was diagnosed with HIV in 1995, which was still a terminal disease, and also because I compared our work with the work that our American colleagues had, the trailblazing work that they had done when they were chaining themselves in front of the FDA to demand the speed up of the processes. Of course, today, 10 years later and 10 years older, it seems that it all happened in the blink of an eye. So there is one person who I think needs to be singled out, and that is Francois Houillet, who contributed the most from the side of the community and patients and citizens in the early years. He was the one who should have been the first co-chair, and I only put forward my candidacy after I failed to convince him to become the one. Lots of us tried, but he was dedicated to his work at Eurordis. And then, of course, the last person, the most important for all of us, who enabled all this and who supported all of us, the patients and the citizens, to play a growing and significant role at the European Medicines Agency, Isabelle Moulon. Thank you very much, Isabelle.
Thank you very much, Nikos. You went a bit beyond your your role as co-chair of the Working Party, but at the same time, it shows the influence of the Working Party on the work on the agency. Could you switch off your microphone because thank you. Yeah, and another thing which is also raised my attention. You mentioned few documents that have been written by the organization members of the PCWP, but actually were not documents of the PCWP. And I think it's also very interesting to see that beyond the work of this Working Party, there are a lot of interaction between the members outside of the Working Party. And we have other examples. For example, I don't know if one of you will mention the very important document you have written on shortages. And there are others which are really initiative from the organization member of the Working Parties, but that were not developed within the Working Party. So I think it's really, really important to mention that beyond the work within this group, there is a much bigger interaction between all the organizations and with healthcare professional organization as well, because most of them have been also involved in the development of some of these papers. So I would like, and I forgot also to mention that Nikos was also a member of the management board, representing patients. And we have in the room some of the former and current members of the management board. So we have Jean-Georges. I think you were one of the first one, if not the first one. Unfortunately, Mary Baker could not join us today because she's sick today. She should have been here, but that's very unfortunate. Wim, you have been also a member of the management board. And now, starting in 2 days, we will have Ilaria, who is our next member of the management board, together with Yann Le Cam. So I think it's worth also mentioning that being in this Working Party is also an important role, and systematically in the Working Party we have representative of the management board through the patient. So I think it's very important to have also this oversight from the management board in the Working Party. So now I would like to give the floor to Liz, and it's a real pleasure to see you back at the agency, Liz, and I give you the floor.
What do I do? This? Yeah, okay. Excellent. Okay. It's a privilege to be here, as always, and it's also a challenge because we need to ensure that the patient voice, the patient expertise, has been involved in all the steps, right from the very first sort of glimmer of hope until it's put on the market, and even after that. And this particular box has my name on it. And I remember the day when we had the first glimmer of hope, when the little Marfan mouse, we have the Marfan syndrome in my family. The Marfan mouse had reacted positively to the active ingredient. His walls of the aorta became stronger, thicker, and more elastic, thus giving us hope of doing the same to us. From that Marfan mouse, it went out to small clinical trials, patient recruited, patient organizations helped to look at the clinical design. We were all involved in that. Of course, the clinical trials and the data of them could not be transparent here because it was before the clinical trials register came into place. That was in 2011. But shortly after the findings of the mouse, we had to decide at home in our family, should our son go on this? This was prescribed off-label. We did that rather early. Maybe it pushed forward his surgery for some years. We don't know. What happened after the initial surgeries were that there were more, the initial clinical trials, was that there were more larger trials. We could follow them in UDRA-CT. And what has now been the final approach to this off-label prescribed medicine, that possibly we need more long-term clinical trials, but in children it seems to have a stronger effect. So the next time I see my cardiologist, I might come off them. But it shows that all the way through every step, we should be involved. And as you said, what were the tasks for CWP? It was transparency, working with the committees. We now translate that into benefit risk, ensuring that the actual medicine is safe. And you were also hinting that there is another task now. This is an off-label medicine. What happens if it gets an indication for a very rare condition? What happens to the price? So that's a new challenge. So the challenge, I think, it doesn't go away. And the challenge that I met with being a co-chair was actually trying to represent you all in the best way I possibly could. Because the privilege is being in a room full of dedicated people with a lot of professionalism, a lot of hopes and expectations from the respective organizations to actually have an effect so that our patient voice is heard. It's the results that count. We found that it was only natural after the enlargement to start a mentorship. Very simple, quite hands-on, suggested reading for the mentored person. The mentor had a suggested list of discussion points. And this is what you find when you sit down and you have an in-depth discussion with somebody who's been in the regulatory environment for a longer time. You find that you have insights, and also to make the less experienced person being able to freely express his opinions. So we need that. And that worked out because we needed to be the best group ever. Because there were so many things that started off. I mean, 2003, it was a tiny little group that wanted something. And through your 3 years, there were a lot of initiative. We were approaching a little bit to be included the benefit risk. I mean, we started a trial period of a year with the SAG. It was very much evaluated, both from the sides of the patients and from the regulatories. We had we had other things that we tried out. The pharmacovigilance working party. We had observers. Then it got on 3 months, and then it was for a year, and then for another year. And then the pharmacovigilance legislation came into force, 2012. Huge things happened. And we had to find a rule. And I mean, during all these years, we are still aware of having the exact right role. What can we pay? What can we play? So then it was very, very important to make a list, Natalie, to make a list of all the various activities that we were involved in, just to show that we were taking part. The legal provisions helped, but very much the EMA attitude, the roadmap to 2015, which set out that we are going to involve patients wherever we can. So I think it's all those things working together, the stronger group, the EMA aspiring to include patients, and the legal provisions enabling us to do so. And with the eligibility standards that you put in, we created a hub. So EMA all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, it came over the years, but we woke up to that saying, right, we have access to patient organizations, consumer organizations, we have access to expert patients. Let us use them. And the best practice that we got to in the Heads of Medicines Agency, even before I was elected, I asked if I would be elected, could I possibly have a meeting with you, Isabel, to see what role could a co-chair play? How could we somehow bring this out to the national competent authorities? And eventually we managed to get to the best practice session because EMA had a working model. It had been really evaluated, both from the point of the patient and consumer and from the regulators. You know, the first time you try something out, the threshold is high. Oh, it can't be done, you cannot do it. But once it's proved to work, then all of a sudden it's accessible to others. So following that, we had service going out to patient organizations. Isabel is involved in a framework with other regulators. So from the regulators' point of view, there was a survey going out to the national competent authorities. And because I'm a pragmatist, but I see the seeds, I see what might be. I took a green pen and put all the good things in green. And there are germs there are seeds that will develop. And this is very much what I'm hoping for even now. And I'm aware of the time, so I will just say that this that you were involved with, the clinical trials, with many of us were involved, really showed with all its clarity the ethical aspects and the gift and the burden to be able to somehow influence that. And what I'm hearing today is that the PCWP is maturing, the interaction is increasing with the healthcare professionals. That also started during my term. And also all the international networks. And I agree with what was said before. Isabel and Ilaria mentioned that more interaction with making it larger is good. But then, of course, there's a balance. There's a balance. You need the in-depth discussions in order to find out the insight going ahead, but it's absolutely essential. So as always, it's been a privilege and it's still a challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Liz. It was a very nice presentation, and a lot has been done when you were co-chair of the PCWP. So our last co-chair is David Harry from the ATG, and this is now your turn.
Thank you, Isabel. When I arrived here at the Working Party in 2006, it was a busy time at my organization because we had so many compounds in development in HIV. It was, after a long journey, safer drugs were hitting the market, the second last generation of HIV drugs. And I specifically remember a trial that we managed to get approved by both the FDA and the EMA, which was a unique trial including 2 novel chemical entities in a single pivotal trial. And this trial did overcome the accumulated multi-drug resistance in so many HIV patients. And this made resistance history. Today, we just had a study published in Switzerland. Resistance doesn't exist anymore in my country, and I believe in other countries in Europe it has gone. And this trial was really key to make that happen. It was that time when I realized how important it was to talk to the regulators and be involved here. Back at these days, I was chairing our scientific working group at the ATG. Now, what made me run as PCWP chair 3 years ago, my motivation was that after 2 mandates as representative here at the Working Party, I wanted to do something with a little bit a broader perspective than HIV and hepatitis C. I thought I had learned a lot of things here, and I just wanted to expand a little bit. And I was specifically motivated to push the agenda to patient involvement at the EMA further, and especially in committees, plus at the national level with the national regulators, which led to the more specific objectives, improving the working methods we had here at the Working Party, and starting the topic groups. We had 5 topic groups launched in the PCWP itself, one on measuring impact of patient involvement, the second one in promoting the visibility of patient input in EMA activities, a third one on training, a fourth on social media, and a fifth on the involvement of young people. One has been that effective, the training's working, a topic group, that we probably can close it down. Then reaching out to the national competent authorities was a goal for me, because we had been so successful working here at the European regulator that it made no sense to me that this kind of collaboration didn't bear fruit, more fruit at national level. And I think we got many of them motivated to start a collaboration, and those who already had one strengthened it. I had a third goal where I'm unhappy with what was achieved. Long-term sustainability of patient representatives at the EMA committees and working groups. People here are providing their free time and do a lot for the public health in Europe. They render a public service, and they do this in their free time. And I don't think this is a recipe for the future, but we did not progress in this area. A few challenges and memorable experiences. The joint meetings with the Healthcare Professionals Working Party that has been initiated it was sometimes really challenging because this room was really packed, and who could see all the hands and all the people who wanted to say something. Also, the number of people in the meetings made discussions not always easy, and a lot of people had a lot to say. So that was not always very easy. However, on a positive note, realizing how many things we had in common with the healthcare professionals was certainly a surprise to me. And one of the things that made this very visible was our document on shortages. Shortages was something that the agency told us, oh, that's not in our scope at the beginning, but we managed to come out with a communication, and we managed to convince people that this was really an issue, and even Switzerland has understood that today. We are lacking children vaccines at the moment. It is making big headlines in Switzerland. So we have really started a discussion on a really hot topic, and the healthcare professionals were keen to work with us in this area. So this was nice to see. The group itself, I feel, has matured a lot, but keeps a very good spirit and a good energy. Specifically looking at the different years, in 2013, patients entered the PRAC, the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, for the first time. We had better access to documents from 2013. Regarding the PRAC, I still feel there is too much weight on too few people being involved in this committee. That's not a criticism of the people, they do a great job, but there should be more. In 2014, we had the pilot project on adaptive pathways launched. We had an update today. This is an achievement that this is ongoing. Also promoting the early dialogue to facilitate quicker access to medicines is, in my eyes, a very important initiative undertaken by the agency. We initiated working finally with the CHMP, the Holy Grail. There is a pilot project involving patients in benefit risk evaluation ongoing still, and I'm very much looking forward to the final report. And we have a clinical data publication policy adopted in 2014. Finally, in 2015, the 20th anniversary of the EMA, that was a lot of looking back, but EMA, and I think we can say this loud, has made a huge difference to many European patients. Medicines regulation is at a different level today in Europe, and really something we can be proud of. We had a very interesting workshop on biosimilars in this year, which was an eye-opener to me. Also very good to be with the healthcare professionals in this workshop. We had a second workshop on medicines shortages, and one on communication in medicines in March this year, which was very interesting. Finally, last but not least, the revised format of the EMA training day. I think it was the best EMA training ever in the last November, with so many EU-PATI trainees arriving here at the agency, which was a special delight. And to end, a special thanks, not to a single person, but to the many allies among EMA staff who made this possible. They took us sometimes on grounds, on territories we didn't even know of. They really helped us getting where we are today. So, thank you to all of you.
Thank you very much, David, for this very nice journey in your during the time you were chairing the PCWP.